Salutations, this is Grim Devel, and welcome back to our Let's Play of Caves of Cud. We're Nashramir, the Repugnant Beast, and I know we ended the last episode on a cliffhanger, finding out that we have the ability to make the golem right now. But, and I apologize to viewers who thought we were going to be doing this right now, this is going to be the reading episode. And the reason this is going to be the reading episode is because I didn't really take a look at like what was going to be in store for us, but I did just take a look at how many quests there were after the quest that were on the golem. And it's not many. It's two. There are two quests after the golem. So I don't know how long those quests will take. I think there's still a lot of stuff we want to do in the game before we like end it, but I don't know at what point. I feel like it could end at any point after that. So we have. I don't know how many books there are that are left in my list of yellow books. I don't have like a full master list of all the yellow books in the game. We have something like 20 or something like that. And I'm kind of in the mood this evening to just read those books. I'm feeling just kind of in that mood. So we're going to do that. We're going to go back to the stilt. And we're going to read books. And then we'll come back here next episode and make the golem, I think. So let's go to, I don't know, Yafo? Let's set a waypoint. Why not? Set a checkpoint, not a waypoint. Let's fly. Wait, how did fly get onto 9? What did I move? Oh, we have demolish now. Let's move demolish. I don't think we're not cudgel attacking a lot. Like ever. So let's move this there. That's fine. All right. Let's fly. And let's go to the stilt. Oh, no, don't return to the start of precognition. All right, to the library. Hello. All right. And I've got water by me, so I'm ready for this. Oh, right, Frigid of Omnibus Sumrir. Which, let's start with that, actually. It's not a yellow book. But is that something that we can read? Your Own Earldom, maybe. It's just like a normal book. Okay. All right. We're going to trade, and I think we can read any of these books. And we might as well just go down this list and find the yellow ones. There's Sheaf of Bloodstained Goatskin Parchment. Now I confer upon myself sovereignty over the artifice of language, that the other may possess sight of the path along which I lead my thralls. Toward Amaranth, O deathless city, whence my cloven-hoofed children dream themselves into being. Hear Mammon, their beneficent father, he who is wrought of his own dream stuff. Amaranthine Mammon, Amaranthine father, Amaranthine dream. Inscrutable ramblings, inscrutable ramblings, inscrutable ramblings, inscrutable ramblings, yet feast upon the goat hearts. We may have already read that one when we were going after Mammoth Soul Drinker, but we're just going to do every yellow one. Okay, here we go. 9th of Kisu Ux. This is a scroll bound by a strand of kelp. I come from the west. My parents sold me into slavery as a babe, though the practice had been formally abolished in Perth years earlier. As a boy, I cut my teeth on the reefs of the shore of songs, and lulled the pale sea to sleep with many a hymn, that she might return our sailors from the black stare unscathed. How the melodies whisked inside my skull even then. I was given no name at birth, but the sailors called me Katu. At 5 and 10 years, I ran away. On Eton's spine, I roosted with an eremite who ushered me into manhood. I learned to hunt and laugh and dream. In time I came to know of the free city and the ingress afforded my kind. I shoved off from my stony nook and trekked to their high gate and settled there, though I preferred to sup with the anglers and other low folk. In a sun-warmed pool under the rampart, the free seer first noticed me. The slant of his neck from where he watched on the parapet presaged my movements, I still recall. I stood from my bath and shamefully padded to my discarded vest, but stopped. I saw him from that distance, his eyes tucked deep into his shorn dome, his frock as inert as a statue's, and I felt no more shame. Under his tutelage, I rose to prominence in his court. I stood by his side as he treated with the Tuildars of Odrum, as he plotted against the southern freeholds. When a traitorous cantor slipped poison into his cup, I smashed it from his hands and sundered the quisling's mind. That night, in the hour of the beetle moon, he introduced me to the mirth of an assembled mind. Together with the other cantors we joined, and he named me Mirthful, and raised me unto his honor guard. I would be dispossessed of it in under a year. But I must pause now. The cant loudens, and the elder nears. I vow to conclude my story if I still draw breath, and if I am free. 16th of Kisuaks. It is dusk. I sit on the bank of the river Svi, but no fire warms my bones. The risk of drawing moon-doting beasts is too great, and any aggression of minds is sure to attract the attention of the elder. Instead, I write by a flame kindled on my thumb. I left off at being named Mirthful in the hall of the Free Seer. No honor is higher for a cantor of oath. For months I trained with my masked compatriots beneath the hall, where our clay cistern stored the fresh water that would later haunt my dreams. In the spring, a letter arrived from the Angler King. He sought a treaty with the Free Seer and invited us to a neutral council on the doorstep of Ibunadir, arbitrated by the Tuildar of Doria. After much preparation, we set out, rowing our sketties beyond the bowl of Iris and to the frosty shores of that far tundra. Over the course of the journey, the Free Seer's disposition soured. He withdrew from the council of the Mirthful, even my own, and spent the better part of the wintry trek alone in his tent. At first I attributed his mood to the fragility of our diplomatic high ground, but I soon learned the true tack. We arrived at the camp of Abunadur on the summer solstice. The twin banners of Athenreach and Doria thrashed in the wind, and the hymns of the Eustace Sutta carried. I remember smiling at the throaty crooning of their priests. As we studied the campground from a hillock, as the Free Seer ambled up to my side, I saw the jewel of the hanging hills, Nisramet, the Angler King's wife, she who cemented the peace between her father's fiefdoms and the Angler King's freehold. I saw her, and I immediately knew my own treachery. The Free Seer's gaze was acknowledgment enough. 2nd of Tebet Ux. I've arrived at Kiukakia. Kind Nuntu shares his hut with me, offers me smoked mushroom, and asks nothing in return. I write these words at his desk, and though he lusts for knowledge himself, he leaves me be to chronicle my past. The campaign back toward Oath was grim. I awaited my fate at the Free Seer's hands, though I anticipated being given the dignity of first returning to the hall and my home. I was not afforded so much. One dismal night under the beetle moon, I was accosted in the tent by my masked brothers. To my bewilderment, the stithening had come already. How had the Free Seer acquired the cherry doters? Had he bargained for them at Ibunadur, or had he possessed them all along? To this day I do not know. I remember little of the stithening outside of the beating of my own heart high in my ears. I passed out, and when I awoke the next morning, the cavalcade had vanished. Only a moment did my recognition last before the chanting in my head took hold. I had heard it before, of course, all my life, in fact. It was the chanting that I weaved my melodies around on the shores of Perth as a small boy. Now, though, it was as if a single distant cantor had summoned 1,000 of his kin, and they each summoned 1,000 of their own. I wept, then I screamed, then I tore the hair from my head. The chant animated my bones more surely than my volition ever had. East and south it urged, east and south, toward Cud. My recollection of the voyage to the Great Salt Desert is fractured and fitful. I grew sicker by the day, but the chant grew louder, and so I quickened the force that compelled me. Surely I would die once I reached the moistureless plains of Mograhi, presumably as had my predecessors before me. Finally I did reach them, where a salt-churned rivulet dried under a golden arch. The arch seems a thing born of my dementia, but that I recall it so vividly, and that I know it's the least of the secrets kept by Mograyi. 24th of Tebet Ux. I edge closer to the grove of fungi and its preposterous promise. Are the whispers true? Could it be all so simple? I can feel the moistness of the eater's flesh on my lips, though the memory is surely another's. If salvation awaits me, then I promise to take it, whether or not I deserve it. Tonight, though, the jungle shrouds me. I sit under a chrome belfry, a leech kneading at my skin. I feel no compulsion to bar its work. The companionship is welcome. Now to awaken the past once more. Mograyi, oh, how the dromads know. How did I survive the great desert? I cannot say for sure. I owe something to the songs I sang at Perth, to the falconry I learned at Ettenspine, to the honing of my sinew under oath. The fractured dream that was my voyage offers little elucidation, but I do remember chewing salt and summoning gusts of wind to suck the moisture out of the dead air. Of all the riven memories that churn in my head, Mograyi only accounts for a coherent 3. The first is a vision of ruin at the fabled Kubris Yeti, the seat of the Wrathchild Empire, stretched across the alabaster plain where the last of their wicked structures toppled effigies of the man-scorpions themselves. I reposed there against my will and only out of exhaustion. Fixated on the night sky in fear and fatigue, I heard the echoes of a great saltback steps. Even those gargantuans know to avoid the place. The second memory is the presence of the giants. Colossal skeletons in the forms of humanoids littered the desert. I had heard the accounts before, and indeed some of the specimens extend as far north as Odrum. Their history is wholly unknown to us or anyone else, but their bones provide some of the only shade on the salt pans, and so they grew to be welcome sights. So it was with horror that I discerned a truth, one night, while tucked into the ribcage of one of 3 cadavers in a small proximity. You see, all the carcasses shared a commonality, their orientation, east and south, east and south. The third memory is the rust. Rusted hulls and rusted spires. It took me weeks to realize what I beheld, for all my boyhood was rife with skeddies and ships, but none were of this size. I envisioned what the past must have looked like, as little sense as it made to me. Mograyi as a vast sea, and monstrous vessels mounting its waves. Markings and etches on their hulls had no resonance for me then. Later, though, I recognized the figure of the spindle, and I glimpsed the importance it held for these seafaring eaters. When I lurched to the ground and was righted by a brown-skinned man with a knife, a glowing cat at his feet, I knew it was a dream. It must be a dream. First of Shwoot Ux. I owe my life to frogs. In my haste to reach the fungal grove, I misstepped. My wandering and buoyant mind blinded itself to the presence of a chosen one. She neared me, set on enveloping me back into the fold, but she was intercepted by frogs. For what purpose did they intercede, I do not know, but they have my thanks. So must they have the Elder's ire. I come now to Cud, and the Seekers of the Sightless Way. The chanting compounded in my skull into a final ecstasy, wherein I joined an aggregate mind the likes of which I hadn't fathomed. I was primed for it, though. From my first joining on Ettenspine all those years ago, to the Rite of Mirth chaperoned by the Free Seer, I knew that sight guides us no more than salt does. There is ecstasy in the aggregate, indeed, and the Elder is as powerful a center as I've known. But a center is it still, and where there is a center, there is a hierarchy. Which piece of my past endowed me with the wisdom to see through the ruse? Was it the boyhood memory of crashing waves on the shore of songs, echoed later in my vision at Mograyi? Was it the jealousy in the eyes of the Free Seer at Ubunadr? Or was it a mere wrinkle in the mass mind, owing nothing to my own struggle? I cannot say. But while the other cantors piped their songs to weaken the Elder's prison, unknowing thralls to a greater mind, I escaped. The Elder? No. Pteau. I write the name in defiance of my captivity, even at the risk it incurs. Pteau knows nothing at first. knew nothing at first, but my absence dawned in time. The continuity was broken, and Pteau sent agents to seize me. Even now they near. The Ides of Shrut Ux. It is too late. Though I sit near a stream of primordial soup, though clouds of spores surround me, it is too late. My invocation of Pteau's name fixed my location and trajectory. The eater's flesh is mine now, but the chosen will be here, in corporeal form, too soon. Could I have lived outside the aggregate for very long in any case? I do not know. The solitude wears on me as much as my flight. I've one last sundering to perform. A sundering. A memory of a distant life, a lost dream, takes hold. I sunder the mind of a foe to protect a lover. Dang, man. All right. That was great. Also, that like really echoes the journey you as the character take in this game. I don't remember where we found this scroll. This might have been in Red Rock? I don't remember. Man. What a story. And like speaking of like that psychic glimmer we have and like how it's all that mass mind is connected. So cool. All right, let's read Modulo Moonstare and the Tree of Life. Read. By daughter Arina. In rainbow reverie I wander the wide territories of Cud. Modulo the Moonstare and the Tree of Life. My dream self knew to avoid the place where numbers go to die. Something unseen there tightens to a point, breaks time's Abelian promise, and urges Crystal on to palisade her weeping gulf. The artifacts of plant and time, crust and fuzz with lossy compression, doze in moonlit marble beds, touched by august muzzles. The past is unwritten as the future, and what is left, broken and changed, to be tended by the point colossi and their swarm. They'd erase me, too. I'm mere rust on the vine's fronds. I'm a dead girl in graveside flowers, peering a powerless eye at the machine function that writes my gospel. But black bodies radiate. A feeling sense obtains, swings in orbit and becomes, on the trauma of a nothing. Soul things take root. We invent so many nothings, zero engines, annihilators, mappers of the null space, but nothings have a cost, promise externalities. Trees grow best beside the dead. Oh, man. Heavy! The writers of this game are really fantastic. All right, on the origins and nature of the dark calculus. Editor's note, this excerpt is published with permission from the notes of Barathram the Old. There's evidence in the arithmetic record that the study of formal systems reached a pernicious apex in the long before. Advancements made by mathematicians such as Russell, Gödel, Eisenkopf, Atufu, Wheatgrass, and System Star contributed to the understanding of notions like undecidability, pointed regularism, and abyssalism. Upon reaching this minimal degree of mathematical maturity, equipped with sophisticated grammars, researchers set out to experiment with the limits of expressibility. They contrived bold research programs and galloped into the mathematical wood, unwitting of the dangers that brewed there. The record is even scarcer than usual, due to the efforts of successive generations to obfuscate the venture. As best as I can gather, at some point in the course of inquiry, a theorist from a mathematical seminary called the Cupola formulated a conjecture on the fragility of formal semantics. The conjecture ripened to a broader theory, out of which spawned a formal system called the penumbra calculus. In the few fragments of text that predate the obfuscation, it stated that, in the penumbral calculus, certain theorems are provable but are falsified upon the completion of their proofs. As much as this result is at odds with the systems of thought I've encountered in my own inquiries, I find little reason to doubt the veracity of the authors. Nevertheless, it's certainly a peculiar property. The Cupola theorists' results erupted into a grand investigation into the expressibility of the penumbra calculus. The conclusions were troubling. Pushing further, researchers constructed sister systems with alternate axioms. These systems were still more fragile, with the system's inference rules themselves unraveling upon the completion of certain proofs. Convinced that their discoveries were made possible by some idiosyncrasy of self-awareness, but synchronously fearful of the implications of their results, some schools of theorists engineered complex automated deduction systems to probe boundary theorems and launched them into neutron stars. The outcome is undocumented, but the result convinced theorists across the coven to abandon research and blacklist anyone who studied the penumbra calculus and its derivative systems. Peculiarly, support for the injunction was unanimous. Of note, even the space folder Pateau agreed to abandon its investigation into the forbidden calculi from the reaches of its bleak star. Though the manner of its consent was not without controversy, to announce its accord, it inverted the color charge of quarks in a small region of space, causing a research station to collapse in on itself. Nonetheless, Pateau's consent is testament to the degree of existential anxiety that could cause investigation into the penumbra calculus to go dark. Whew. That was a mouthful. Gonna get a little water. On humanoid mimicry of animals and plants. Why do some creatures seem to prefer when we assume their likeness while others hate it? As a zoologist, this question has interested me for some time. To address it, I must first draw a distinction between natural mimicry, where certain humanoids have developed animal and plant likenesses on a biological level, and unnatural mimicry, enacted in the forms of clothing and other decorative adornments. As for the former, it appears all creatures exhibit kinship towards humanoids who look like them in the biological sense. The latter scenario is the interesting one. It's tempting to draw the divide between mammals and non-mammals, but the truth is more complicated than this. It's true that only creatures who seem to take outright offense at mimicry are mammals, but there are documented cases of mammals accepting the mimic. For example, fork-horned helms endear their wearers to both antelopes and goat folk. On the contrary, ape fur clothing and puma chitin vests inflame apes and cats, respectively. The important detail here is the context in which the clothing is made. Poachers hunt apes and pumas specifically for their prized fur and chitinous shells, and being reasonably social creatures, both species take offense at the flaunting of these trophies. Birds, on the other hand, seem to know that feather harvesting can be, although isn't always, done without proving fatal for the bird in question, though another hypothesis points to birds' specific appreciation of plumage, regardless of context. Unshelled reptiles seem to have few qualms with mimicry, perhaps believing the mimics to be truly reptile in part. Mollusks, trees, and insects all tend to identify with shell bearers, leaf donners, and firefly symbiotes, respectively. Without exception, however, all creatures seem to detest the practice of wearing the severed faces of their kin. Curious. Fantastic. I love how much lore there is behind the mechanics of the game that you really only see from these books. It's really great. All right, we got a torn sheet of graph paper here. We may have looked at this already. Oh yeah, it just says, why is deceit so accessible to me? I don't remember where we found that. Okay, the Canticles Chromaic. We may have read this one too. And it's just verses 17 through 24. Okay, no, all right. Verse 17, Song of Aang. I sing of the union of our lords, of our argent fathers infinitely wise, who made the firmament their home, of the Cassifescence beauty manifest, whose chromium shoals are awe itself, of their sacred joining, when our fathers so enchanted wrought machines from her naked womb to inhabit on the earth. Blessed are those who hear it so. I sing of the union of our lords. Verse 18, Song of Beth. O curse the wretched spectres who yet possess her children. O curse the autumn rains which eat away their shine. O praise the argent fathers who sired all her children. O praise the Cassifescence which watches over mine. Ong, Bet. And then verse 19, Song of Ben Caronium. Are these alphabet letters? I mean, Bet is the second letter in Hebrew, bait. All right, anyway. Verse 19, Song of Ben Caronium. Our jungle is but her garden. Our lake is but her drop of rain. Our desert is but dust in her hands. Our wind is but her eternal breath. Our sun is but her luster. Our lives are but her dreams. Verse 20, Song of Crestasia. O sovereign fathers, I tremble before your glory. My heart quivers for the righteousness of your judgment, for you to humble the proud, to bear witness to their fall. I live to serve you. O sovereign fathers, I tremble before your glory. My loins quiver for the rapture of the sacred joining, for you to conjure chromium from inside me, to bear those sacred apparatuses. I live to serve you. Verse 21, Song of Inatium. On the 6th day of the sacred joining, our argent fathers, who in their benevolence breathed life into our flesh, created the Baetles to oblige our desires. O praise our argent fathers, wisest of all beings. O praise the Cassifescents, beauty incarnate. Their being is our gift. Verse 22, Song of Gedonai. Immaculate chromium, spun on the cosmic loom, who shattered inward, then burst forth from beneath the crust of earth. The flesh of my children rots for you. The flesh of my children rots for you. The flesh of my children rots for you. Fall on your knees, O hear the argent few. That's something else that's kind of similar to Hebrew. Is in Hebrew, something is repeated 3 times to really emphasize it, to say how much you mean it. You say kadosh, 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 holy, holy, holy. During Yom Kippur, there's a liturgy that you say 3 times. So this kind of reminds me of that. Verse 23, Song of Ishuriam. O Baetel, 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 they made it out of chrome, and when it's waxed and ready, I'll have a new genome. Yeah, this is very, very obviously and humorously Jewish informed, inspired, Judaism inspired. Maybe we should sing it. Oh, Baetel, 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 they made it out of chrome, and when it's waxed and ready, I'll have a new genome. Verse 24, Song of Hebrons. Praise be upon Shekhinah, whose exalted touch brought forth shining engines from within the Cassifescents, yet who deigns to live among us. He who taught us the story of our creation, who breathed life into our flesh, that we might bear witness to Chrome's glory. Made the ground shake, but the 6 day stilt never tumble. All right, Canticle Chromaic. What's next? The Mimic and the Madpole. Fantastic. I think this was one specifically that someone was hoping we would find and read, so. A mimic crawled from the cold, starless reaches of Bethesda Susa to stretch itself across the prairie grass and warm its gummy scales in the sun of the noonday. Warm breezes blew through the lonely heath, and before long the mimic fell into a lazy sleep. Hours of restful slumber passed until it was stirred awake by the near rustling of shrubs. Its eyes opened upon the visages of 3 fork-horned gnus grazing on the prairie grass. Tresses of auburn hair streamed from their mammoth heads as they leisurely chewed the straw of the earth. Allured by their languorous way and wanting for companionship, the mimic asked the gnus if he could tread among them, and graze of their pastures, and nap with them beneath the evening sun. In all these things you may with us partake, said one gnu, but take heed, for ours are idle lives, and you may soon grow weary of them. But the mimic joined them anyway. Day after day it filled its belly with the tall grass, and it cooled its lips upon the quiet banks of streams, and it surrendered its sluggish mind to the land of Nod before the light of day was extinguished. Until one morning, while the gnus slackly chewed their grass tenderly by the early dew, the mimic, who had indeed grown weary of the beast's idle habits, stole away down a babbling brook and into a thicket dark with shade. For the remainder of the day, the mimic followed the brook as it winded its way into the wood. As the last of the waxen light began to seep from the air, the mimic noticed several peculiar pilings of muddy sticks and logs up ahead in the middle of the prattling stream. A musker, its brown fur soaked and pressed against its small body, arranged twigs around the base of one of the piles. The mimic understood immediately. These were the musker's lodges, each one meticulously erected twig by twig. So impressed was the mimic with these well-built abodes and the diligence of the musker that it asked the rodent if it would share its home and teach the mimic its craft and abide the mimic as it built a lodge of its own. "Erecting a lodge is no paltry charge," said the musker. "Near all of my day is spent chipping and stacking wood, and though you marvel at the lodge itself, you may scowl at the labor that brings it forth." But the mimic stayed with the musker anyway, and the following morning it awoke with the musker at dawn, and together they hewed branches from the wine cypresses with their teeth until the pall of the evening was cast. And then they gathered all the rent wood and packed it together with mud drawn from the bed of the brook. At the break of each day they began anew, and they did not quit until long after sunset, when the mimic could no longer spot the musker in the darkling thicket. Until one morning, while the musker wore its teeth on a rotting log, the mimic, who had indeed grown weary of the labor charged to it by the musker, sneaked away by the babbling brook, out of the shady wood, and into a valley quilted with the gnarled roots of brinestock. Again the mimic followed the stream through the hollow creeks of the foothills until it spent its brackish waters into a vast lake. Here upon the bleached shore the mimic gazed into the lake and marveled at a shoal of madpoles as they lashed through the briny water and pursued their fishy prey. The ferocity of these hunters, unrivaled in their agility and viciousness, enchanted the mimic, and so it asked the madpoles if it could dive into their waters, and race with them through the weeds, and feast upon the scaly flesh of the smaller fish. "Nay, you should desire none of these things," said one madpole, "for we are ravenous fiends, and oft succumb to fits of maddened fury." But the mimic dived into the lake anyway, and as it splashed in the water, the madpoles, who sensed in their proximity living and nubile flesh, darted towards the mimic and tore it limb from limb. That's great. That's kind of like an anti-hero's tale. What's the, that structure. Kind of like Siddhartha-esque, right? That was fantastic. Is this a yellow book? No. All right. Blood and Fear on the Life Cycle of Law. I'm going to have a little more water. We're making good progress. That first book we read was really long, and so I thought a lot of these might be, but it looks like most of these are just like a few pages. So we're about halfway through the episode. I'm not sure how many more we have, but let's keep trucking. I'm really enjoying this. Blood and Fear on the Life Cycle of Law. Author's foreword. I initially had no intention of writing any of this down. What business is it of mine, I thought, to divest the ignorant of their hard-earned bliss? Who am I to speak up against the static inertia of incurious dullards who choose to cultivate their lack of awareness of the world around them, as my witless kin tend to their tidy watervine rows? I am a warrior, scientist, and chef. Devoting my time to educate the undeserving is the least of my many desires. After enough time spent among other alleged sentients, however, I determined that more of my time has been wasted in correcting so-called experts concerning this matter than I would waste by writing a text about it. So, here, you're welcome. Chef Agate Severance Star. Great forward. In Bela, the village Fondren sing a cautionary tune, passed down through generations of Fondren before them. Elohart and Belahind, they had a field of law. They made the leaves into a tea and ate the petals raw. But when those petals grew again, the Fondren had forgotten, and tended not those fields of law until they smelled most rotten. Now Elohart and Belahind lie in a field of law, because their fields got hungry and devoured the Fondren raw. The very core of Hindran culture is an overwhelming fear that governs every facet of their being. They call outsiders Kendrin and refuse to believe that they can be understood. They fear boars even as they cook and eat boar flesh. They fear one another. But the most extraordinary incorporation of fear into the Hindran way of life is, without a doubt, the cultivation of fear. I refer not to the Hindriarch's propaganda or proliferation of fear-mongering tall tales, though both are mainstays of Bela. I refer specifically to the taming and cultivation of the law plant, whose alpha and omega of life are steeped in blood and fear. It is here that I debunk the most common misconception concerning law, that the dreadroot is a separate entity. It is not. The dreadroot is the protruding stem of the lie rhizome, doing its very most to survive until it can blossom into the law bloom, as it does in the flower fields. I have wasted unforgivable amounts of time and energy explaining the connection between these two life phases of the same plant to the ignorant. Usually, they will point out that dreadroot grows all throughout Cud's southwest canyons, but it is exceedingly rare to discover feral law there. To this I reply, if after whatever studies you claim to have made, you are yet incapable of deciphering the workings of even the most basic ecosystems, I cannot help you. For those of you who are capable of the most basic logic and adjustment of personal worldview, please read on. In spite of being a flowering plant, law is not a true flower. Its blooms, not true blossoms. Law is a root with a decorative upper stem, reproducing through the distribution of rhizomes. The baboons and snapjaws of the canyons use the dreadroot supply for food and love the taste of its petals, and any root unfortunate enough to bloom will quickly be defoliated by hungry mammals. Though dreadroot is capable of inducing fear, any relatively intelligent creature is able to overcome the fearful association to return and eat. The process being what it is, fragments of dreadroot are distributed, the rhizome takes root, and dreadroot proliferates without thriving. So it goes. In the flower fields, however, the varied nature of both predators and available food changes. Boars seek a varied diet, mainly consisting of star apples and reptiles, not showing a particular interest in dreadroot or law. The boars will eat law if no better food is available, but it's quite unusual for such scarcity to disrupt boar territories. Thus, law flourishes, gaining a measure of cognitive process, limited mobility, and a new means of reproduction. On reproduction, another common misconception is that feral law attacks because it is hungry. It is not. Feral law's practical lifespan is short. It is rare for a fully grown bloom to survive longer than a week, and during that time it subsists completely on water, salt sun, and soil. The advantage of law's murderous demeanor is not to sustain itself, but to dramatically speed reproduction of its kind. Most of a law blossom's growing energy goes into making its tumbling pods, thorn-covered husks possessed of tremendous kinetic tension. Through violent shifting of the rhizome's weight inside, these husks roll along the ground at high speed until they encounter a living creature. They then release the surface tension of their husks and detonate, flinging flesh-piercing thorns and buds all around just after making an obnoxious squeaking noise. If the prey is killed, the rhizome buds can then take nutrients from the prey's corpse and quickly grow into a new feral law plant. There is no textual proof to present to those who still believe that dreadroot and law are different plants, but I happily invite skeptical parties to babysit a dreadroot and defend it from baboons until it matures, an endeavor that will take about as much time as you have removed from the end of my life through the stress of listening to your absurd demands. Any Hindran pariah you meet will have seen dreadroot mature into law countless times. Go bother one of them. For those who are more interested in the culinary applications of law in all of its life cycles than said life cycles themselves, I soon plan to release the Blood and Fear Cookbook, a collection of recipes that, from feral leaf crudités to petal steaks, elevate one of Cud's more interesting plants to a level far beyond the bland mala soup of my village of origin. All right, so that's a book we want to find. The Blood and Fear Cookbook. I'm going to write that down. The Blood and Fear. Because we've seen cookbooks, but we've kind of ignored most of them. Okay. Next is... we have that recipe, yeah. Crime and Punishment. Okay. Oh, the ink is faded beyond legibility. So I assume that this is the actual Crime and Punishment from Dostoevsky? All three of them have ink faded beyond legibility? I guess so. Huh. I can only assume it's like our Crime and Punishment. All right, Council at Gamma Rock. Publisher's note. The wind of change is blowing through the belfries, and a new consciousness is upon us. The events of the 566th Warden's Moot have escaped the confinement of their moonlit promontory, have whisked down the salted crag and entered the high halls of state, have snuck under the thatched doors of our very homes. The formation of the Quetzal Caucus is historic. This is a moment that demands our attention. I know that by publishing these minutes I incur the disfavor of the Fellowship. Despite what they'll say, I mean no harm to their organization. I've redacted the specifics of their astronomical rituals, and I've left my conjectures on the ingredients of snail tea to my unpublished notes. The rest of the document betrays no secrets that time hasn't betrayed already, and the significance of the proceedings tips the scales in favor of the public good. In the Cassifessence may they find the mercy to forgive me. Sheba Hagarius, the 6 Day Stilt, 999 YK. That's the librarian that we're reading this in front of. Minutes from the midnight session of the 566th Annual Warden's Moot. Under the beetle moon of the fourth night of Ut Yara Ux in the year 998, snail tea was served, and the star oath was recited. Then, in the midst of a light rain, the chair ascended the rostrum, the kinnor was strum, and the third session of the 566th Assembly of the Fellowship of Wardens was called to order. Reports. Upon commencement of the session, the chair called for the recitation of the night's reports. 3 wardens from the northern hills ascended the rostrum and reported on the fates of the 6 settler caravans that had embarked for the lower asphalt mines. They averred that only 2 remain and recommended that no wardens be presently dispatched. 2 wardens from the dunes of Mograhi ascended the rostrum and reported on an ongoing dispute between the Dromads and the Vintners Guild. An assault on a Dromad caravan outside the village of Tipur was traced back to a merchant cadre, and a penalty on the proceeds from a fortnight of sales was assessed. 4 wardens from the southern banks of the river Svi ascended the rostrum and reported on goat folk incursions. The villages of Shabal and Ekamus were sacked inside of a month. The wardens recommended mounting a counteroffensive. 1 warden from the Rainbow Wood ascended the rostrum and reported on a bevy of soup sludges who had requested the fellowship's presence. He was jeered for leaking wax on the dais and descended in a fit of retaliatory swears. Panel. The reports being at an end, the chair called for the commencement of the night's panel discussion. 8 wardens ascended the rostrum and initiated a discussion on the Ksars of the mountain folk and their employment of the spite counterscarp. Its merits were contrasted with the familiar rampart and palisade, and assailant tactics were assessed. A short martial demonstration ensued. Resolutions. The panel discussion being at an end, the chair called for the proposal of resolutions. The chair recognized a warden who asked to ascend the rostrum with a coterie of comrades to motivate their proposal, and the chair assented. 12 wardens ascended the rostrum and announced the formation of the Quetzal Caucus. They proceeded to formulate their resolution, which called to restrict the provision of the fellowship's services to only those communities who are governed by democratic means. The Eid Freehold was cited as exemplar, or who had communally voted to eschew such governance. There was an uproar in the hall, and the chair took several minutes to regain order. A point of information was requested as to the resolution's bearing on extant assignments. The speaker clarified that the proposal included the retraction of wardens from communities in violation of said criteria, at which point the hall erupted into bedlam once again. Roused to a state of enmity, a second group of wardens advanced on the rostrum. There was shouting and weapons were drawn. Unable to regain order, the chair dispatched the sergeant-at-arms, who broke into the fray and, abetted by several of his deputies, ended the melee and admonished the 2 groups. Once the hall was settled, a motion to call the question was controversially accepted, and the vote was tallied. The resolution failed by majority vote. A speaker from the countergroup was recognized by the chair and proposed an ad hoc motion to expel the treasonous chattels of the purple bitch. Another uproar. The question was called, and the motion failed by majority vote. The hall erupted into a tumult of shouting, and failing to regain order, the chair struck the gavel, and the session was abruptly adjourned. End notes. Okay. Wow. So the Council of Wardens, there's a faction of the wardens that only want to that think they only should protect folks that are in a similar government that they have. All right, the Corpus Calleus we've kind of read. We're not going to read that. It's just, we've already read like part of it. Well, yeah, I mean, we have read part of it, and it's just like in recipes. But you know what? Why don't we read the note to the reader? And that's the only thing we'll read of this. It is often said that the cure of a plague is also the cause. While there is truth to the maxim, I found it to be well supplemented by a broader and systematic approach to the treatment. The following is a record of known afflictions, their symptoms and remedies, which I have compiled from the logs and personal notes I authored during the course of my 40-year tenure as physician and apothecary to the farmstead of Cardus. Abbot Urium of the neighboring monastery of the illustrious Heart of Chrome has agreed to instruct the monks of the scriptorium to reproduce this text for posterity. The reader who finds use in these notes is indebted to him. Beniyayut Im, Cardus 56 YK. Okay. If we have time, maybe we'll go back to that, but I don't know if we will. Aphorisms about birds. Birds can't eat rice that wasn't planted. Reared on the vision of our fairy tales, we're accustomed to feeling pity for the man who's transformed into a frog or finch. But seldom is it that we spare a thought for the artless beast who's transformed into a man, and upon whom fate has surely played a much crueler trick. If asked who's responsible for your misfortunes, blame birds. They neither care, nor can they muster much of a defense. Let no fear in your heart grow so immense as the fear for large birds. Birds ruin festivals and lift sieges. Ol Ori squinted and then nodded at the Glowcrow's suggestion for a game of backgammon. The boy started, "But Ori, how can you dice with these vermin after one pecked out your eye?" Ori shrugged. "Can't blame the crow. He was gonna peck, whether my eye was there or not." The sighting of a crimson swift augurs the death of an aged water baron. A silver thrush heralds a fossil harvest bountiful in chrome. But the tongueless cagu, stay far from a tongueless cagu, far and farther. Some birds breathe fire. My meaning here is plain. Atop the spindle, where debtors and birds go. Okay, is that a clue? All right, across Mograi. Let's take a look down. How much more do we have? Oh, yeah. Okay. We're getting near the end. Although we're all 47 minutes in here. Across Mograi. How long is this one? Long. All right. Preface. Obviously and unfortunately, no primary sources are available from these distant lands. Much of this record draws upon the accounts given by fungi who crossed Mograi on the backs of dromad merchants. As a matter of convention, I date all events according to their chronological distance from an event of paramount historical significance, namely the publication of these volumes. Accordingly, note that the event's parenthetical dates signify their occurrence prior to publication. Oath. Oath is a freehold in the central Sunderlees populated by the Esper cult called the Tyrants, the youngest of the major freeholds in the region. It was settled by Freeman Oath in 61 PP after the Lost War. The freehold consists of the furnished comb caves along the faces of the towering bluff known as Maidencombe before the war. Origins and the Lost War. In the early months of 62 PP, a mysterious figure began murdering the bandit hosts in the central Sunderlees around Maidencombe. Though the neighboring freeholds originally named the murders blessings, soon reports from river merchants of queer gatherings in the comb caves, howling men igniting the rivers and the night sky with fire, disquieted the Sunderlees' seat of power. Rumors spread that Esper bandits had forsaken their bands, discarded their guns and bows, and sworn fealty to the shadowy figure. These merchant anecdotes and rumors continued into the winter and were substantiated when several merchant sketties were captured by the Dark Host. From the man who identified himself as Oath the Free, the merchants learned that he had indeed organized the Esper bandits and exiled Voidcanders from the fiefdoms of Odrum. Each sketty was made to return to the freehold from which it came with a document the host named the Annals of Oath, in which Oath, a self-styled prophet gifted with prescience, recounted a series of his visions and demanded the immediate release of all espers indentured against their wills to the freeholds of Truekin. The Combe Kings were predictably unswayed by the annals and ignored Oath's mandates. However, by the end of 62 pp, no merchant who rode within 20 leagues of Maidencombe was seen alive again. Dozens of sketties were found drifting downriver with the charred or drowned corpses of their rowers in tow. About the same time, the Annals of Oath began to spread like wildfire through the river freeholds. Several free espers left the freeholds to join the host, while those indentured espers were found to sympathize with Freeman Oath, as he was known in the freeholds, were largely killed or gelded. Of particular interest to Oath and his host were the Windweirds of Perth. The Windweirds are a caste of indentured espers who foretell, and in rare cases alter, the strength and duration of the seasonal trade winds over the Pale Sea. Oath's host rode westward, and his acolytes infiltrated the Seahold and roused support among the Windweirds. Having suffered the months-long trade blockage at the hands of the freeman, and now forced to watch Oath's seeds of discord sprout within his own kingdom, King Rhodos of Perth gathered his strength and rode the winding canyon rivers east towards Maidencombe. A series of skirmishes ensued. The might of Rhodos's navy was such that the freeman was forced to cede the combs he had taken and retreat to the fortifications of Maidencombe. Rhodos sieged the combe for several weeks, entreating the kings of Athenreach and Irisveld for support. When no aid came, King Rhodos chose to take Maidencombe with his own strength. The Battle of Maidencombe lasted for 4 bloody days. Ultimately, Rhodos's losses were too many, and he was rebuffed and driven back toward Perth. Oath missed no opportunity. He gave chase to the weakened navy and slaughtered nearly 1,000 more Perthic men. Rhodos eventually reached Perth, but the might of the espers was too great. Oath breached the comb's sapped defenses, sacked the freehold, and slew King Rhodos himself. Several of the Windweirds chose to join the freeman, while many others remained in Perth. A few left the freehold without Oath. The espers rode back to Maidencombe with their spoils and lifted the trade blockage, redirecting their efforts toward settling the combe. Oath gave his name to the freehold and was known thenceforth as the Free Seer. He ruled the espers until his death in 38 pp, when his successor forsook his own given name and adopted the title of Free Seer. So that tradition continues in present-day Oath. The name Tyrants itself owes its origin to an ironic interpretation of the entreaty sent by King Rhodos to King Ercarthus of Athenreach during the siege of Maidencombe. The envoy was captured by the espers before it made its way upstream toward the northern freehold. The relevant excerpt reads, "Row the twining thaw, bring your sketties to bear on Maidencombe. Join your strength to mine, that neath the coupled banners of the Seahold and Athenreach we might sunder these half-men, these tyrants who would wrest from us what is ours by right and deed, King Rhodos." The scroll on which the message was written still rests in the hall of the Free Seer, along with the charred skull of King Rhodos. Life in Oath. Oath is ruled by the Free Seer, who resides in the hall of the Free Seer, deep in the heart of Maidencombe. After the tradition of Freeman Oath, the Free Seer must be psionically prescient. He may also have influence, though it is not required. The Free Seer chooses his successor, often naming the esper with the most promising precognitive abilities. Though the tyrants are free to leave Oath at their leisure, within the freehold the Free Seer's rule is absolute. While the tyrants mostly pursue isolationist policies, they do trade with the neighboring freeholds. However, they only deal directly with Truekin in the rarest of circumstances, and they insist that merchant caravans include a mutant envoy. As for trade goods, the tyrants rarely offer the services of their void cantors, but people are known to come from far and wide to audit the prophecy of the Seers of Oath. The tyrants' most coveted imports are cherry daughters from cherry daughters from Irisveld, and ghost sap from the rust caves of Cud. Along with the tyrants, Oath is cohabited by a caste of people, both true and mutant, with no psionic aptitude. After the Lost War, these people, called the Undermensch, left Perth with the tyrants of their own accord. They were mostly fisherfolk and craftsmen, and they served the same roles in Oath. Their motivations for leaving Perth were never well understood. It is unknown whether they served now as freekin or as psionic thralls of the tyrants. Stithening. Stithening is the name given by the tyrants of Oath to the process of introducing a cherry daughter to the host's brain through the ear canal. The scarab worm is attached to the host's ear, where it sheds its shell, crawls toward the eardrum, and burrows into the brain. Once entrenched there, the parasite feeds on the temporal and parietal lobes, inducing several changes to the host's body, including loss of hair and nail, loss of weight, and yellowing and greening of skin pigment. The changes occur gradually over a period of several weeks. Immediately after a stithening, though, the host undergoes a violent period of bodily adjustment, with several side effects including vomiting and fever. Notably, in the case of an Esper host, the feeding also reduces and ultimately eliminates the Esper's ability to resist the Elder Cant. Thusly, all stithened Espers leave Oath and venture into Mograii, never to return. Stithening is usually reserved as punishment for high crimes such as treason, but some of the most devout Espers choose to undergo the process. Once a year, one member of the Mirthful, the Free Seer's Royal Guard of Void Cantors, is chosen by the Free Seer to be stithened. The Esper's name is recorded for posterity in the Hall of the Free Seer. This is considered the greatest honor that may be bestowed upon an Esper of Oath. A new Esper is chosen to serve the Free Seer in a ceremony called the Rite of Mirth. I wish we had read that book before we read that first one, the scroll with the kelp. The parchment wrapped in kelp. Ooh, all right. I'm a little out of breath. We don't have a ton more. We've got a bit more, and I know we're almost near the end of a regular episode. I think this is just going to be a longer episode than most, because there's not enough to merit a whole second part. So we're just going to keep going. Fawns of the Meadow. And I'm going to take another drink. Editor's note, the following is an excerpt from the travel diary of Kaylen Sandshell, who generously donated her leather-bound volumes to the monastery of the illustrious Heart of Chrome. May they remain forever preserved. One can traverse the arable lands around Mograii for lifetimes without ever encountering the deer people who call themselves the Hindran. In numbers, they are but a few hundred, and as a people they do not care to interact with other creatures when they can avoid it. In the 20 years I have actively wandered, I have met but a handful of wandering Hindran families, all exiles from their home, and yet unwilling to tell me how to find the society that made them pariahs. I am, however, a hunter as well as a scholar, and after several years of searching I was able to locate their secret village, Bela. All I will say of its location is that it is somewhere in the flower fields of Cud. I have no desire to betray their confidence of a mostly peaceful race of creatures. My arrival was obviously not celebrated. The Meadow's border scouts are extremely perceptive and conversant in tracking and obfuscation alike. By changing landmarks, using confusing and threatening sounds, and otherwise making my stay in the adjacent wood as unpleasant as possible, they sought to deter me from my path while avoiding notice. When I eluded the guards and made my way to the first neat row of carefully tended water vine, the Hindran farmers who saw me at once took terrified flight. The extreme of fear that Hindran feel toward outsiders is a strange one in my eyes. They are large, powerful creatures with arms and legs at least as strong as a human's and covered in dense fur that protects them from cold weather. Each individual is skilled at using and maintaining a sharp metal vine reaper. Their antlers are strong as bone and naturally quite sharp. Hindran pariahs who learn to fight live longer than most of Cud's wayfarers. Strange as this attitude may be to me, I cannot argue against its efficacy. The Bela villagers have lived peacefully under informal, matriarchal, gerontocratic rule for generations. Their eldest or wisest woman becomes Hindriarch, and her word on most things is obeyed by every member of the tribe, who refer to her as Grand Doe. The current Hindriarch was the first Hindran to hold a conversation with me, and I will admit to a measure of anxiety before being under her hawkish gaze. She was none too pleased at my presence, but intelligent enough to understand that killing me or driving me away would be a greater inconvenience and danger than offering me hospitality. We parted with an uneasy compromise, and I began my residence and observation. I found quickly that the oral history of the Hindran is shoddy at best, perhaps with purpose. Their etymology is similarly muddy, but there are some observable patterns. Dren is a suffix applied to sentience. Hindren, obviously, and the word for their young, fondren. I also heard kindrin a great deal, as it is their word for non-hostile sentience like myself. All Hindran names end in the suffix hart, or hind, although they do understand that these are gendered terms. A majority of male fawns bear hind names. It seems that for quite some time, hart was a name appendage reserved for the smallest or most ill-behaved fondren. As it is, the suffixes are considered unisex in modern day, and the Meadows fondren now have a much more even distribution of the suffixes than their parents. Life for Hindran is, for the most part, uneventful to the point of what this traveler would consider extreme boredom. The watervine and law fields are meticulously tended day after day, never harvested late, and always producing as much crop as possible. Growing up, all fondren are trained as farmers, but a lucky few will become carpenters or blacksmiths in order to keep what little infrastructure they maintain running. Those who display particular aptitude and loyalty to the Hindriarch have a chance of becoming border scouts, who keep the nearby fields safe and occasionally bring in wild game or star apples while patrolling. The resulting side dishes provide some much-needed variety from the daily Bela staple, a hearty law petal soup combined with crushed mats. While this ma-la soup is delicious, I appreciated how the occasional serving of boar brisket gave a much-needed spice to my day. I found little else of interest from the adult Hindran. They seemed unwilling to speak with me at length. While I heard rumors about a village treasure, I could not obtain any information about what that treasure actually might be. By contrast, I learned a great deal speaking to the Fondren, whose curiosity about the outside world is rapidly becoming difficult for the elders to contain. More than once I heard the term Hartind, allegedly an ancient term for Hindran who live as both genders or neither, which the young ones take as evidence of a more egalitarian past. I can feel the wanderlust, both in their fascination with me and also with the zeal with which their elders would clamp down on any talk of lands outside the meadows. The world outside the flower fields remains an expanse of unavoidable peril for the adults of the tribe. Understandable, as Bela trains few warriors. They have no standing military and only a handful of combat-trained scouts. The Hindran take their border security rather seriously, and any of their number who chooses to leave Doze so permanently and is erased... Oh, I'm sorry, I said Doze, but it says, any of their number who chooses to leave does so permanently and is erased from the tribe's collective memory. The small families of Hindran I met in the law fields, and rarely elsewhere in Cud, are all exiles, whether due to crimes committed or simply the choice to live elsewhere. Within Bela itself, pariahs are even more thoroughly ostracized than I knew. Any mention of their names is spoken only in whispers by the Fondren, knowing that being caught speaking of the dead means harsh punishment. This sits poorly with the young ones, and my instincts tell me that their dissatisfaction is a step beyond standard youthful rebellion. The winds of change are coming to Bela. By the time I left Bela, it was with relief. I haven't the patience for the life these dear people lead, and I was beginning to catch cabin fever, in spite of spending very little time in the village's brinestock yurts. The Hindriarch was as happy to see me go as I was to be off. My pack was loaded with the vine wafers and dried flowers, of which I'd long since grown tired, and I was ushered out efficiently by the scouts. By the end of the day, I realized that I had taken something else. A Fondren had snuck out of the settlement behind me, and refused to return to their village. I hardened my heart against the Fondren's pleas, and found a scout to guide them back to town. If Reshef be merciful, the little one will find happiness there, or the luck to find a more fruitful life elsewhere. All I can say with certainty is that the poor thing does not lack for bravery. Etta and the Earthling, Canto 1. All right, this one's also a little long. 1. Once the Earthling peered across a vast ocean of sand and asked, why, across the clustered cosmos, are mollusk civilizations most common? Etta smiled in patience. You speak mistakenly, but your mistake is cousin to truth. It's correct that when geonauts dredge fossils from the ribbon of endless Earths, the shells of whelk folk are so numerous as to appear prosaic. But their prevalence isn't owed to their dominance, only the calcium of their shells, which decomposes less quickly than the gelatin of their peers, and the silt of their watery hearths, which gathers in soft eddies and shrouds their remains like a bedcloak. Do well and abide this truth, Earthling. The present is but one vista to the past. 2. Once the Earthling stared at a garden snail and asked, "Is consciousness real or merely an illusion?" Etta smiled in patience. Imagine an autumn breeze unlatching an acorn from its branch and casting it into a river. Does the acorn fall to the left or right bank? The Earthling frowned. If it landed in the river, then the answer is neither, or rather, the answer is in between. Etta let a moment pass before continuing, "Take care not to erect prisons out of your words, Earthling, lest you confine yourself from enlightenment's reach." 3. The Earthling held a ticosaur bone in their hand and mused, "What poor creatures! They roamed the planet in sovereignty for millions of years, yet now only through their dusty skeletons do they remain." Etta responded, "The ticosaur might speak with the same pity of Earthlings, who have prospered for but a tenth as long as its people had, and who wrongly imagine themselves above the fields of ruin." 4. The Earthling put down a hoary tome and asked, "Why across the clustered cosmos, and despite their venerable ages, have no civilizations of the Coven attained consummate knowledge or reached final enlightenment?" Etta smiled in patience. "I sometimes forget that your people know not of the Moo Door." The Earthling was intrigued. "What is this door you speak of?" Etta answered, "The Moo Door is the threshold beyond which a civilization ceases its quest for erudition, having lost the motivation to make further inquiries. It's natural to assume the door lies at the end of the path of knowledge, but, in fact, the door is reached far sooner." 5. Running 2 fingers over the holes of a flute, the Earthling mused thusly. "When I read a book of tales, or watch a photoplay, or listen to the flitting melodies of a flute, my heart sings to its rhythm, at least for a time, and my mind is lost to the truth it conjures inside me. Might it not be that the very waking world is another such conjuration, a dream that distracts me from the hushed place I truly inhabit?" Etta let several moments pass before answering, "That, in the terms you seek, we cannot know, but the answer is undoubtedly yes, for what is an experience but a simulacrum of an older experience? And what are our realities, if not themselves approximations of a truer reality?" 6. After reading the history of Iota Draconis on a light sculpture, the Earthling exclaimed, "Curious! Each Hypatian bears a glassy protrusion from its left clavicle. What is its function?" Etta paused and then answered thusly, "The nearest meaning in your language is friend." Okay. What's next? I don't think we have much more. Oh, we just have 3. Heirlooms of Cud. Oh, and this isn't really a book. This comes into play when you do the quest with the Earl of Almonporch. But we'll read this first page. "Attachment to physical objects is a peculiar phenomenon. Often the bonds we form transcend physical values. They are steeped in history and rolled in tradition, and they elude rational explanation. It's unsurprising, then, that my research findings indicate certain preferences are held by the myriad factions of Cud for certain types of items. These preferences, each surely sculpted by some historical event lost to memory, persist in the veneration of certain cherished heirlooms. I've assembled a catalog of these preferences for posterity, compiled from the notes of Sheba Hagarius." Thanks, Sheba. Okay. Yeah, my mouth is getting tired here, so I'm glad we're reaching the end. "From entropy to hierarchy. by Q-Girl. Formulation and animus. In the course of my readings and correspondences, I've observed two eminent threats to social equality. The first is the dissolution of social order via entropic forces. The fabric that holds us together frays and we fall apart, are most vulnerable first. The second is hegemonic control exerted by a few over a many. Here the fabric is knit tightly, but it's stitched into a ladder that narrows in ascension, and the majority are consigned to the bottom rung. My first task is to ask how we can study these phenomena. In the physical sciences, we observe, measure, and experiment in order to formulate and then test hypotheses. Here, though, observations are sectional, data is spottier, and the systems at play are far more complex, their edges softer. Applying a 10 times scope of rationality to a 1,000 times scale structure would lead me to harmfully reductive conclusions. In fact, this very approach is employed by hegemonic powers to invent facile justifications for their rule. So, in complement, I borrow from other approaches and systems of thought. In particular, I'm interested in how artists examine these phenomena and challenge orthodoxy through metaphors. The art historical record is fragmented, but fraught with examples. One that stands out to me is the account of Red Sky, whose totally Quetzal conceit was the first to whet my curiosity on the subject. As the story goes, the entire court of an ancient sultan, including the sultan himself, was addicted to a psychotropic salt called ipsis. Conspiring with a sorority of smugglers, an unnamed artist plundered the sultan's stock of ipsis, molecularly altered it into a composite cellular structure, and launched it into low orbit. There it burned red in the sky, an affront to the Sultan's sovereignty for 3 years. Each time the Sultan tried to disperse it through the means available to him, the structure, described in the record as a cellular automaton, rearranged itself and persisted. Quetzal. There are plenty of modern examples, too. Take Tao, who makes ionic mazes through the hexagonal crystals of the moon stare. I first formulated the entropy hierarchy dichotomy while tracing the paths of two of her spirals that, at their intersections, burst into a bouquet of space-time anomalies. I'd Quetzal if I could meet Tao, but it may prove difficult as I hear she's a sub-entity of the sentient tree city Java. The two poles. Two groups typify the two poles of the entropy hierarchy dichotomy, the Gear Whites and the Buddhist Templar. The ethos of the Gear Whites is chaotic self-indulgence, manic quickening, a mulish desire to see things fall apart faster, and a fetishization of a history's dice rolls. They billow like an excited gas, smashing into each other as often as anyone else, and peeling bits of order from the communities they rancify. They are exponents of senseless violence. The Templar, on the other hand, are enactors of extremely ordered violence. Their brutality has been codified into orthodoxy. Their ideological structures are anti-entropic, but destructive and abhorrent. They seek to construct a rigidly hierarchical society with a slave caste on the bottom rung. Through rituals like the baptism in the blood of the reclaimed, they indoctrinate the privileged among their subjects. The rest of us are met only with force. Cool. Really good to know. Man, I'm learning so much about this game. This is great. I'm really loving this. All right, last one. Frivolous Lives, Volume 1. Oh, this is a long one. Okay, I guess it's good we're ending with this one. Okay. Frivolous Lives, being the foremost catalogue of humanoid kings by the Bakata Utarch, Volume 1. Preface. This record draws upon the notes and accounts of the constituents of the consortium of Phaita, hearsay from those who observe the futile lives of the humanoid kings, and personal anecdotes of the kings themselves, who in their struggles to remain relevant beyond the seedling-like lifespans, managed to record some useful data. As a matter of convention, I date the reigns of the humanoid kings according to their chronological distance from an event of paramount historical significance, namely the publication of these volumes. Accordingly, take my suffixal notation rendered after the parenthetical dates to signify their occurrence prior to publication. That's PP. The Scattered Age, question mark to 100, question mark, PP. During the period of humanoid prehistory, the greater Gersh entities roamed Outer Cud, and humanoid communities were largely isolated. Consortium records predate the end of the Scattered Age. However, they are disparate in their assertions and ultimately unreliable. The period's dearth of scholarship is likely a result of traditions derived from Hegelrut's contempt of writing implements. Abram I, 100 to 97 pp. The first humanoid to successfully unite the farmsteads of Western Cud was Abram, called the Sower. According to the lore of Abram's descendants, of which the consortium has chosen not to disabuse them, Abram's call to arms rallied his kinsmen, and under his sovereignty they drove the greater Gersh entities beneath the surface to the depths of Inner Cud, at which they now roost. To follow were 2 or 3 decades of jubilation and prosperity that lasted until the day Abram, disillusioned by the growing tumult among his sons on the question of succession, famously beat his sword into plowshare and dissolved his kingdom. A lot of Judaism here. No reign, 97 to 96 pp. The years that followed Abram's dissolution were marked by fear, turmoil, and bloodshed. His sons fought fiercely for control of the farmsteads, while water barons conspired against them, and in some cases staked their own claims. At last, sometime between 970 and 960 pp., Abram acknowledged the futility of the prospect of peace without his providence, and returned to the throne with his sword in hand. Abram I, 96 to 954 pp. It's 970 question mark. It's not 97 question mark. It's 97 something to 96 something. I see. All right. 96 something to 954 BP. Unfortunately for the reluctant king, his second reign proved to be much less auspicious than his first. The jealousy among his sons never died, and what little record remains of the period indicates Abram spent the remaining years of his life in anguish over what his rulership had wreaked. Cairo I, Edom, Emir, On first. 954 to 946 pp. Having never publicly named an heir, Abram left his kingdom to the devices of his scheming sons. No consensus was reached among them, and for 8 years the brothers warred, until Cairo I was able to consolidate power and wrest his father's kingdom from the grips of his brother's lifeless hands. Cairo I, 946 to 925 pp. For all his disinterest in brotherly love, Cairo I was an able statesman and an effectual leader. During the course of his 21-year reign, he repelled the mountaineering barbarians who raided Cud from the north, established trade relations with Chava, the Tree of Life at Ain Roj, and renovated 2 of southern Cud's shimmering archways. He died of old age in 925 pp. And bestowed the throne to his son, Cairo II. Cairo II, 925 to 919 pp. Cairo II proved to be nothing like his prodigious father. In the course of 6 short years, he despoiled his grandfather's kingdom. Ignoring the advice of his counselors, he insisted on levying harsh taxes on a young Barathrum and his disciple Tinkers. And in short order, the Orshib severed their ties with the kingdom of Cud and left Cairo with no access to the artifacts he needed to protect his people. Furthermore, he was a notorious wastrel. He spent the entire year of 922 pp. In a freshwater bath, which he ordered his servants to continuously refill. Lastly, and most egregiously, he incurred the disfavor of the consortium by humiliating 2 of their dignitaries who were visitors of his court by commanding they pose still for several hours while he hosted his autumnal feast. Mercifully, he was assassinated in 919 pp. No reign, 919 to 889 pp. Following the disaster of Cairo II's reign, Cud plunged into one of several dark periods of disjointed rule. From what little data of the period survives, we note that life proceeded much as it had in the days before Abram. Moisture farmers sucked the land dry, landlords protected their serfs, and madcaps hunted their fortunes in the innumerable chrome corridors of Inner Cud. K4K5, 889 to 873 pp. Given the circumstances of Cairo II's reign and the decades of tribulation that followed, we are able to form some understanding of why the humanoid denizens of Cud would rally behind a robot king. Little is known of K4K5's life prior to his regal ascension, but it is believed to have emerged from the cavern called Siloam sometime during the Dark Age. In its humanoid subjects, we suppose it found a purpose to its theretofore capricious life, and in it his subjects found a kind and affable ruler who unified farmsteads and mining settlements and had been estranged for 30 years. In the end, though, even K4K5 could not escape mortality, and in 873 PP it succumbed to a severe bout of flash rusting. Before it perished, however, it named its pupil, Mehmet of the Hills, as its heir. Mehmet's first order of business upon taking the throne was to honor his predecessor with the commission of a monumental statue that still stands today in the northeastern jungles near the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives? Okay. Mehmet I, 873 to 844 PP. Possessed of the indefatigable patience of his mentor and a singular learning to improve the lives of his subjects, Mehmet I successfully preserved order in Cud for nearly 30 years. He benefited from an auspicious lull in the reproductive activities of the Gersh entities, and he wasted none of the time fate had given him. From the years of 871 to 866 PP, he dispatched envoys into the Great Salt Desert Mograyi. Hundreds of Kudians perished at the hands of the nomadic tribes, expired to heat exhaustion, or met fates worse still, until in 866 PP an unnamed emissary made contact with the Dromad merchants. The Dromads, who had believed the inhabitants of Cud too barbaric for trade and had dismissed the region for centuries, began at last to include Cud in their world-spanning treks. These visits stopped abruptly when Mehmet's successor, Utut, the Boorish, slaughtered the first Dromad caravan to arrive after the onset of his reign. But the precedent for trade relations was established nonetheless. Domestically, Mehmet I set out to construct the first library of Cud in the far southern jungles, but his efforts were cut short by the barbarian invasion of 850 PP. The peaceable king spent the remaining 6 years of his life repelling the incursions of the barbarians over the Mount of Olives, but he was not skilled in the art of war, and in 844 PP, the barbarian king Utut sacked Morshire, beheaded Mehmet, and seized the throne. It mentions the Mount of Olives. Mograyi is very clearly like the Dead Sea or something like that, which is, or potentially the Mediterranean Sea, which is now dried up. It really seems like this is a future Jerusalem, or a future, Eretz Yisrael, or whatever you want to call it, Levant. It seems like this really is that, and that it used to, I don't know how much of it is fantasy and how, I think we're going to find out if there is, Earth as we know it did exist, or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, 3 more pages. Utut the Boorish, 845 to 838 PP. Following the regicide of Mehmet I, Cud inherited its first foreign-born ruler. It is the belief of some that nurture is the mother of nicety, and that endowed with a proper tutelage, anyone may come to cultivate the self-position of a rightful gentleman. In Utut the Boorish, we observe this hypothesis disproved. Upon settling into his recently raised capital of Morshire, Utut installed several local aristocrats to positions of power in his court. By year's end, he had slaughtered them all. At every turn in the labyrinth of diplomacy in which Utut had found himself, he chose instead to smash through the walls. This doctrine of carnage actually served Utut well for several years. The blue-blooded water barons were terrified of him. The kings of his rival barbarian clans were satisfied with pillaging the outskirts of Cud, and even the sons of man kept to themselves in their stronghold at Udin. For all the Boorish king's might, however, he was not immune to poisonous gas. It was with this knowledge that Weisterwort, the 648th, was able to win the throne and inaugurate the first and only plant dynasty in Cud's history. I just realized, I think I said Levant, but I meant Levant. I think Levant is a bakery. That's why I paused at a certain point. Okay. Weisterwort, the 648th. 838 to 833 PP. Upon hearing the news of the king's death, Utut's political adversaries cheered Weisterwort as a hero. They were soon disabused. Whereas Utut was known to vanquish anyone who opposed him, Weisterwort did not bother to reckon that distinction. For those that did survive the Plant King's fickle expulsions of lethal gas, they found themselves subject to rather odd rules of law. For instance, in 837 PP, Weisterwort mandated that humanoid babes were to be nursed with wine instead of their mother's milk. In the following year, he commissioned a minstrel to author a musical play. The Plant King was so delighted with the result that he commanded all of his subjects to learn the various rules of the play and to alternate performing it nightly in their respective villages. For the 5 years of his reign, Wisterwort's eccentricities were humored amidst a backdrop of famine, disease, and poisonous gas. In the winter of 833 PP, and for reasons undocumented, the accomplished Weed fell into a deep depression, and before the winter solstice had passed, he strangled himself. He was survived by his heir, Wisterwort, the 649th. Wisterwort averred that history would judge him kindly, and it has. While it is true that more people perished under his reign than any of his predecessors, and that he accomplished very little of lasting historical value, one can only fathom how unpleasant it must be to live in such close proximity to so many humanoids for so long. Indeed, it is a wonder the poor king did not take his own life sooner. Wisterwort the 649th, 833 to 833 PP. Wisterwort the 649th possessed no interest in ruling over a humanoid kingdom, and he abdicated mere hours after inheriting the throne. No reign, 833 to 787 PP. This 60-year period of anarchy was particularly arduous for the denizens of the Rust Caves. The wake of the Wisterwort dynasty had left no humanoid fit for rule. Cud was plagued for decades with torrential glass storms fed by the westerly winds out of Mograye, and Gerstlings poured forth in numerous numbers from the lairs of their mothers. It wasn't until Abram II, like his namesake before him, roused his countrymen and set out to rebuff the Gershling throng in 787 PP that Cud was reunited as one. With the story of that ill-fated king does the second volume of my chronicle begin. And who knows if Frivolous Lives Volume 2 is even in the game? I don't know. Oh my goodness. So that was an extra long episode. Obviously, this is one that people can hopefully skipped if they're not interested in that. But next episode, we're going to go right back where we were. And we're going to do the Golem. And if we do find any additional yellow books in the game, I think we will just read them as we find them, one at a time. That was great. I really enjoyed doing that. I really enjoyed the novel. Like, I'd never read most of those books before. And they add so much to the lore of the game and your understanding, and really add so much depth to the goings-on. So kudos to the Cud writers. And I enjoyed playing with you today, and I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.